Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
Really what this conversation is today is this is basically a collection of unfiltered observations from 10 years on the other side of students. I get to see what they say and what they do when you are not there, and that's where I want to share my observations from. So for the sake of time, I just want to jump right into the list and make sure I don't have to rush too much on any one of them. But here are the 5. I hope that every parent never forgets the relationship ultimately determines influence, especially to do number 2, to step into their world, to recognize that their reality is their reality, and to understand the experience of your son or daughter. I hope that every parent never forgets the importance of loving one another. 4th, that communicating unconditional love is a must. And finally, to stick with it. I promise you, it is so worth it. One of the most significant things you'll ever do in your life. But I don't know how we lean into this without the person of Jesus. How we fight for the ideal without him leading the way.
I think parents have these things called hopes and dreams. But today what I want to do is I want to talk about what happens when reality smashes into those hopes and dreams. One of the things we don't think about a lot is the fact that God understands parental pain. Perhaps the ultimate example of this happens in Luke chapter 15. The younger son came to his father and said, "Father, don't you think it's time to give me my share of the estate?" And the dad does the unthinkable. And he actually does it because perhaps the father understood sometimes the quickest way to get him back home is to let him go. And that's great to know, but what do I do now? First, I would say this. I would say unwavering prayer. Secondly, unending patience. He was waiting patiently for his son to come home, and unconditional love. And my prayer for you is going to be that God gives you clarity on one step you can take in a direction where perhaps he or she will come home.
Well, hello everybody. If you did not skip through that opening video and you listened to Jeremy's intro, then you'll recognize I am not Jeremy. I am the guest host today.
No, you look much different than Jeremy.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I am Jordan, and Jeremy's he is in the mountains of Colorado this week. So
he's a mountain man.
He said he's adding something like 4 14ers to his resume. He'll be at 6 total, which is...
I've never, that's mountains.
14 miles in the air, I think. Is that right? Is that too high?
I'm
That's
sure
too high. Not 14 miles, 14,000 feet.
Oh yeah, 14
14,000
miles
feet.
would absolutely, I didn't catch that mile comment. That's important.
See, I would love if we cut that out of the podcast, but they're probably going to leave that in.
No, it should be in there. I think you're in space at that point.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, you're out. You're pretty much out of oxygen.
How many miles to space?
Mm-hmm.
62 miles. So
Okay.
you're a quarter there.
I was way off on that. Really?
How high is Mount Everest?
Yeah, because
Mount Everest is 29,000 feet.
Mm-hmm. What's the average plane fly at? What, 35,000 feet? Something like that? 40,000?
This is a lot of facts I can look up at the beginning here.
Come on, Jordan, go quick.
Wait, 5,000 feet in a mile. So 14er is like what? Yeah, 3 miles, 3 or 4. 3 miles.
It's
almost
way up
3.
there.
It's almost 3 miles.
So he's oxygen deprived as we speak, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do mountains? Do you hike or?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is in the appearance of do I hike? I'm not trying. Yeah, typically hikers are a little bit more fit than I, but no, it.
What about skiing? Do you ski on mountains?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like skiing. I definitely like the mountains as long as there's a time frame.
Yeah.
I think I have there's the imaginative side of me that's like I'd love to be in the mountains and hang out and ride or think or
the picture is nice.
It's fantastic. But then when I'm in the mountains and it's like really cold, and I'm like I think it's about a week.
Yeah.
Maybe a week and a half is like pushing it.
Yeah.
And then I'm ready to
get out of the mountains.
Yeah. Yeah, Em and I have been to some of the nicest ski resorts, I think, in the world.
Wow.
And we have never skied. We've been to Banff, Whistler, Park City, and
why do you guys
just
make the
walk and
track
take
all the way to a ski resort and don't ski?
Know. I don't know. I have an irrational fear since I tore my ACL in college that I'm I hear so many knee injuries. I'm like, how fun can it actually be?
It's really fun.
That it would be worth the risk of going through that again. Yeah. How great.
Well, the tension is it's really expensive.
Yeah.
There are a couple places that, it's still expensive, but not as.
Yeah.
But those places you mentioned is really expensive. So you pay a fortune and then twist your knee and you're done. You're like, I paid for that.
Yeah. Yeah. To clarify, we didn't stay in the nicest resort in the world. We just traveled to them and went up the gondola and came right back down.
All right. Well, that's an interesting vacation, Jordan.
So. Anyways, but I guess it also works out the timing of this because now we get to hone in on our overtime podcast specific to parenting, which you and I have now covered the last 2 parts of the Family Filter series.
Yes.
And both of those were about parenting. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about kind of the goal of parenting today. There's a little bit of irony in that you have 18 years of parenting experience now. So that means that between the two of us, we have 18 years of parenting experience.
That's right. Hey, 2 are better than 1. Here we go, baby.
Yes. So, that was a fun little prep process, kind of getting ready for part 3. And it is a weird balance because, what I shared, I genuinely am passionate about.
Yeah, well, I think, and I know what you're saying. I joke about dogs quite a bit, and you've got Mowgli, and you're like, I think you try to put Mowgli up there. It's like, I'm a father. Look at my son.
I hope people know that I'm joking. I always get a little nervous that they're gonna think I'm taking it real seriously. And
well,
I know what it's like to be a dad because I have a dog.
Yeah, we are getting to a place in our culture to where
that's true.
It's
there's a very small delineation today.
Yeah, to where I think he is a father.
Yeah.
But I think to give yourself credit, and I've come to you before and asked parenting advice, which is those have been funny interactions.
Yeah.
But I come to you because you are in the room, and that's what I love about your message in part 3. You're in the room of, my sons. You're in the room of, those listening and watching our sons and daughters, and you're watching them, and you're seeing this vulnerability. You're seeing this unfiltered piece of them. You're seeing almost the realness of the outcomes of a lot of our parenting efforts. Yeah. And so you have such a cool perspective, and this is truly, what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1. I may have the inside perspective of going man, it's like the war of parenting.
Yeah.
You're in this season, and wow, there's ups and downs. And like I said this last Sunday, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but the pinnacle of my joy and meaning and happiness in life has been found in parenting, all wrapped up in one. But then I get to come to you and go, hey, is this working?
Yeah.
What are you seeing? Here's the outcomes of my efforts. What are your, what are data points, or what are, observations? And that's the cool thing about you. And so collectively we have 18 years together, but I think there's a little bit more context as our, previous, student director. Yeah. You've seen a lot.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed with other areas too, it is kind of interesting when you almost get 2 perspectives of the expert and the casual observer, because the casual observer almost in their ignorance sometimes can speak to the ideal or speak to what they see without an emotional tie to it, which is also just interesting. But then we did switch from that to part 4, and this you did this past week, and you guys might have been able to see from that kind of recap there at the beginning. We talked about really when the ideal doesn't happen, and we talked about something that could apply. I think this type of redemption that could apply to a lot of relationships, but specifically with kids. Specifically, you talked about that prodigal son kind of story and moment, and what happens when, and where do you go, and the dreams you had are not being realized. And I just think also meets a lot of people right where they're at. So basically, I think my hope of this convo today is that we almost would flip back onto you from, okay, I've shared my observations now from yours, and you're 18 years. So in terms of at least parents that have a kid in the home, you're at some of those later stages now, middle school, high school kids. And so and what's unique about your sons, just knowing them personally, is they have 5 very distinct personalities, even the twins.
So wild.
It is really weird. I feel like I've seen a lot of siblings that have more similarities.
No.
Like all your kids are just
Yeah,
like,
the Lord gave us that. He's like, here you go.
Yeah.
Each one is definitely a different flavor.
it's so true though.
Yeah.
But
well, Jill and I joke about that with Jonathan and Mike, our twins. I
Yeah.
mean, we're like, when you go back, is this, the environment is shaping them, is like what's
the
shaping
nature
them?
nurture thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nature
it's
nurture,
like-
all that kind of stuff. And we're looking at them going like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Like this is clearly out of the womb. I
Yeah.
mean, like Michael was like, like really like, just kind of wiggly and like really tight and very focused and intense.
Yeah.
And Jonathan was like just snuggles.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's a little bit more pudgy out,
Yeah.
as a baby. And he was just like, just hold me.
Yeah.
And like right out of the womb, that was the difference. And it was wild. And it's just, yeah, you're right.
So, well, I think with that, based on that though, even watching them and watching distinct personalities, I think kind of like to go through maybe some of those phases. Like, what do you see different, like young, middle stages, old, one who just graduated. I want to work towards a little bit kind of towards the end, even like the point, like the goal, like could we get that simple with it? Like nobody really shares that with you of like, hey, what's the end game of this? Am I just trying to keep my kid alive or what is that?
It's important.
And maybe just share some resources for people that want to take the combo further. But maybe if we start with that first one, just how would you, I've seen some people do this in different ways and different books and stuff like that, but how would you kind of break down, even if it's an oversimplification, the phases of parenting, the different stages? Like how would you kind of compartmentalize those as you look at your kids growing up?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I'd say on this. Typically I don't have my iPad and all that kind of stuff, but, I did write some notes under each one of these kind of phases, if you will, or seasons or categories. And I'll just say this, on the front end, there's a gentleman by the name of Reggie Joyner. He did kind of a collaborative effort, and I think you've shown it before.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that in part 3, the phases.
The whole phases. Mm-hmm. That's a great resource. And so I would highly recommend that. I think there's lots of different ways to kind of almost compartmentalize parenting, if you will. Mm-hmm. I mean, for lack of a better term, it's like, okay, what happens ages 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, and so on.
It's kind of cool. There's the big summary book, right? Like there's one that kind of goes all 0 to 18, and then there's like an accompanying, like smaller one for each year. I mean, it gets that specific.
They're
in it,
fantastic.
Right? So, yeah. It's cool.
And so if you're listening or watching, I think we can probably post that, but it's just, just search phases, Reggie Joyner, parenting phases. It'll come up and you can get those, I think, on Amazon, all that stuff.
Totally.
So that's a great resource. The one I have is a little bit simpler than that. And I put there four phases in parenting, and Jill and I have come back to this over and over and over. I think there's, phase 1 would be discipline, that's just basically ages 0 to 5, and that's very much kind of, surviving years. Mm-hmm. And then I think phase 2 is training, ages 5 to 12. Kind of phase 3 is coaching, 12 to 18, and then phase 4 is friendship, 18 plus. And I got these 4 from Andy Stanley, who is a lead pastor of Northpoint Church in Atlanta. And the first time I heard these was probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. Wow. So it was on the early stages of parenting for Jill and I. And it was the thing that just gave us handles. It gave us some like, okay, this is what we're experiencing. Okay, this makes sense. And it also gave us some direction to go like, what should we be doing in these phases? Mm-hmm. And so in the discipline phase, just a couple, things I wrote down here is, I think it's important to know, like, this is like size and position kind of phase. This is like, 0 to 2, you're putting like, food in their mouth, and I think, if I can remember back, but like, there's a point, I think it's from 0 to 6 months. I don't know when you stop, they eat themselves, but whatever it is, it's that phase. You're putting them in the car. It's, you're protecting them and all that kind of stuff. But this is also when they turn 2, and there's great research on this, they begin to develop their own identity. So from 0 to 2, they're like their identity, like there's some studies out there that when you go, hey, where's your mom? Mm-hmm. And like a 18-month-old or 20-month-old will actually point to themselves. Like they can't differentiate their identity between who they are and their dad, who they are and their mom, because their identity is so wrapped up in their mom or dad. Mm-hmm. But then at the age of 2, that's when they begin discovering like, oh, they start pointing to themselves.
I'm my own person.
I'm my own person. Yeah. And that's where the terrible 2s start coming out, and that's where it's like, and they're just discovering who they are. And so we misinterpret those so often, and we just put so much weight in our parenting, like, oh, I was a terrible 0 to 2 parent. Yeah. And I'm like, no, they're just discovering who they are. Like, go easy on yourself, you know? And so when that's starting to happen, that's where when you start to see that shift, and you'll see it, it's pretty cool. You'll see that shift to like 2-3 years old to where you're like, you're becoming a little boy or little girl. I mean, you're becoming your own individual. And when you see that, it's really, really important to start thinking about foundational, like parenting things. And when I say foundational things, I wrote down several things. I said, being available. So this is a time sometimes we think, oh, I just need to, hit the gas at work and work, a ton so I can be available in their teenage years. Well, they need you in their teenage years, but I'm telling you, they need you now. And this is a time to go go on walks, like create these patterns, create these habits in your family, create these almost like in the organizational world, we talk about systems all the time. Your system is perfectly, designed to get the outcomes you're getting. So work on the systems, work on the habits, work on things that you want to lay foundationally. And this would be like, hey, we go on walks together. We go on intentional dates. So I take my 3-year-old and we go get ice cream. Yeah. And that's the beginning of a date and a beginning of intentional time that we get to, and I get to discover. This is where you talk about God and be intentional. Like if you're a follower of Jesus, go like, hey, we're going to pray together. Mm-hmm. And hey, why don't you try to pray and let them do it? And, they're going to ask you questions like, why do I pray? And, what do I say? And these are all these, beginning. I think this is when you establish, and I heard this from Andy Stanley. He said, I think like in his top 3 things of all of parenting, and he has seen far more than I, and he's way ahead of me in terms of seasons. He said eating dinner together 4 times a week, meaning eat dinner together around a table with devices gone, TV off, more times a week than not. That he said, I'm telling you, that's one of the greatest parenting things you could do. Well, you establish that in this very early season. Yeah. Because this is just what we do. And they're in their high chair, now they're getting out. And then, hopefully you have a dog and it's eating the food on the floor. And, but man, we eat dinner together. We put all our devices up. Yeah. We turn the TV off. Yeah. This is a time to establish that. Yeah. Because now it's normal.
Yeah. I think I've heard him talk about that similarly. Just there are conversations that can take place in that environment that just, out to dinner, which we think we want to provide, and it's fun and it's great. It's nothing wrong with that, but conversations just don't happen in that same kind of environment, And so, it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think and this is where you start setting boundaries. This is where discipline starts coming in. Talking about the point of discipline is not, I'm going to pay you back. You're going to, retribution, revenge. It's all about reestablishing. It's from love to go, I want to restore you. Like you've, disrespected mom. You've disrespected your brothers or dishonored them. So at that point, I'm going to step in and here's a consequence. And you're starting to teach these things and lay, those boundaries. And this is where you start asking your kids questions. This is like, be curious. Like, this is a normal part to go like, hey, tell me more about that. Your, whatever your, I don't know, your toy car. I mean, I think of boy things all the time. I tried to go girl and I was like, that's not coming to mind. So it's like, or tell me what you think, what are you thinking about life? Or, hey, what do you think about your relationship with your brother or sister? Or, how's that going? And these questions may be too far for them, but it's a beginning. It's a foundational. It's that first, 0 to 5. And now you've created, something to build on because you've laid that foundation. That moves us to like the training. And training 5 to 12, again, it's more of what you laid foundationally. So all those things from habits to, we're talking about God, we're praying together, we're going on walks, we have the intentional. But this is where you start to give them more responsibility. And so training phase, ages 5 to 12, this is where I wrote down, this is where, you start going, hey, why don't you mow the lawn? Hey, why don't you help me fix the car? Hey, why don't you do some laundry? Hey, why don't you, patch the wall? These are the things, hey, let me talk about, even paying bills. And you're starting to go like, hey, I'm giving you more, like you're growing up, you're getting older, you're moving towards masculinity or femininity. You're, at the age of 12, there typically is a big turning point there. So I'm preparing you for that. And I'm giving you those kind of responsibilities. And this, again, is where size and position, you begin to feel this fade. You begin to go like, gosh, like they're growing and they're thinking more independently and they're still that, mommy, daddy. But now it's like, I remember when Timbo, I think he was the first one to call me Buck.
Oh.
Hey, Buck.
Whoa.
It's like, whoa, son, you don't call me Buck.
Yeah, it's like a thing, too. With students, too. They just call their parents by the first name.
Yeah, I'm like, no, I'm Dad.
Yeah, they call people who aren't their mom and dad.
Yes.
And then they call their mom and dad
this is why
on a first name basis.
Parenting is so hard. This is one example of that.
Right.
But this is where, you start to see that. And this is, again, where that intentional relational investment. hey, we have dinner around the table. Yep. We talk about our days, highs and lows, and I think it's called rainbows, highs and lows and rainbows.
Sure, that's one way to do it. Yeah,
yeah. And so it's like talk about those kind of things. This is where I share stories about here's what happened today, and I've got a lot of stories as a pastor of typically people meet with me in very hard circumstances,
right?
And so that's the majority of kind of things I'm thinking about, and I can share some life lessons as a result, and then. You go from discipline phase, which is 1 to 5, training where you start giving them responsibility. You start to turn the temperature up and the intentionality of those habits and relational investments. And then coaching is really 12 to 18. And 12 to 18, one of the things I would just say is these can be some of the hardest years, hands down. And for us, for Jill and I mean, we've experienced incredible joy in these years, but these have also been the years we've questioned our parenting the very most.
Wow, yeah.
Because now they really are. I mean, once they hit 12, and these aren't perfect ages, but around 12, this is when puberty hits. This is when they're going, hey, hear me roar as a, as an individual, as an independent, autonomous, I can figure life out. And, I've said it before from stage, but church calls this rebellion. And there are some rebellious components in this. But the majority of that is them discovering who they are. So this is so foundational to go, like, this is when you're going to, I wrote down, I wrote down this. I said, don't freak out during this stage. This is a stage, they're in middle school, they're in high school, they're going to tell you a million things and you're going to freak out. Or everything in you is going to freak out. Yeah. But this is where emotional intelligence is critical. Keep your emotional intelligence, look at them and smile. And then make sure you have a counselor. Yeah. Make sure you have a mentor. Make sure you have a group of people that you go and you just process all this stuff you want to freak out about, because you will freak out.
Yeah.
And this is where, they're friends. This is where dating happens. This is where social media happens. This is where their identity. This is sex and sexuality, I wrote down. This is school and their future choices. This is, they may not like you a lot during this phase. But, keep in mind, later is greater. Mm-hmm. Later is greater. Like, hey, during this phase, it's like, man, mom and dad, it just feels like a coach. Mm-hmm. This is why, this is a coaching season. Yeah. Like, we're not going anywhere. You have just as much worth or more worth in my eyes. But these are critical years to go, man, you're going to face so much is going to come at them, especially, I think every generation says, especially in our generation, but it's like, especially in the generation of social media,
right?
Where this is a competition that I think is unique and distinct to this season of parenting, like this generation of parenting, to where you're competing with something that is gigantic. Yeah. And so you're going to want to freak out, but this is a time to coach, and this is a time to say, hey, let's talk about friendship. Yeah. Hey, let's talk about sex and sexuality. In fact, I don't know if I should share this, but with my boys, and with my younger boys, we're moving into this.
Having those combos. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, they always joke. It's like, and every single one of my boys, I'm like, okay, we're going to have that conversation. Yeah. And this is a conversation, not a talk. And they're like, no, we shall not have this talk about sex and all these, sexuality. But I love it. I mean, for the most part, when they're around, for me, it's around 12, I'll go there and I'll talk about like a lot of stuff that, and I'll ask, hey, have you heard this term? Yeah. And they're like, no, I've never heard that. Like, and and they always tell me, Dad, I know it all. Oh, I watched the video at school, Dad. I know it all. And I'm like, okay, well,
6th grade PE or whatever.
Yeah, it is. And I'm like, tell me what you know. Right. And then I throw out like, well, do you know what this means? And this means, and this means. And so it's a weird, uncomfortable thing as a parent, and certainly as a son or daughter. But you got to begin that. You got to go for it and get uncomfortable, because this is going to be something that is huge in the world. Yeah. And if you can get, when they're 15, 16, 17, it's like, this is our 80th conversation, because it's not a talk, it's a conversation that we're having about sex and sexuality. Yeah. It's a big piece of, their development. Right. And you got to coach them. And then you move from that, and the last phase is what I would call friendship. And we try to put, this phase of friendship, oftentimes in the training or the coaching years. Mm-hmm. And this is why I'm saying later and greater. They may be like, oh, just be my friend and let me do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we got to be intentional here. Yeah. And this is the intentionality of, relationally still investing, relationally going, you're my son, I love you, I'm for you, but like, I'm going to do everything I can to be there, to coach, to mentor, to kind of impart what I talked about on Sunday, the wisdom piece, so that, what I shared on Sunday, which is Proverbs 22, train a child in the way they should go. This is the training coaching time, so that when they are old, it will not depart from them. So maybe when they're 18, 20, 22, 24, 20, all those, there's a lot of times where their frontal lobe is not developed. They're not connecting dots in life. They've got to go make their mistakes on their own. They're going to learn the hard way. And it's a killer as a parent, killer emotionally. But you got to go, God's big enough. God can handle this. I'm unwavering prayers I talked about on Sunday. But it will not depart from them. The it is what you're doing in the coaching 12 to 18 season. That all shows up again. That all comes. That's what God will use in their life to remind them of who they are, remind them of what is their way forward, remind them of what is wisdom. And that's when your friend, hopefully, God willing, they come back to you when they're like 25 and go, Dad, I think you were right.
Yeah.
Or Dad, thanks so much for, being willing to have those awkward, hard conversations. And, because I feel much closer to you today as a friend than if you were just trying to get me to like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because that's a season like I've just gone into really the last 5-10 years type thing, and had some of those conversations with my parents, about things that I learned or didn't listen to, and that friendship stage and wanting to hang out
How
with
old
them.
are you again?
It's all new. 28.
28.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your frontal lobe, I think is
I'm 3 years in. I think it finished. Yeah.
It's good.
It's a whole new world.
Hey, welcome, Jordan.
Thank you. I've arrived. So, man. So discipline, training, coaching, friendship. Those are the 4.
Yeah. So discipline 0 to 5,
Yep.
training 5 to 12,
Yep.
coaching 12 to 18. Don't freak out, and friendship 18 plus.
And that coaching stage, that's the one I've gotten to observe the most. That's the one where I spent most of my time here at Northpoint. I feel like the only other thing I would almost want to plug that I hadn't really planned to say or anything, but it's I go through all this and I hear what you're saying and all of the fears and worries and want to control, and it's small groups once again rise to the top for me in terms of importance, because I'm thinking about that for them to be with friends, but even those small group leaders, we use those phrases partnering with parents and all that kind of stuff. I wish every single kid in that, all 0 to 18, but especially that 12 to 18 was in a small group with 2 small group leaders, and it has nothing to do with the size of Northpoint. It's I just want every single kid to have those trusted adults, because when they go through a phase of I don't like mom and dad, but mom and dad's got a partner and somebody in their corner and somebody they can call. I just can't imagine going through some of those things solo, because it's such an overwhelming stage. So many times.
Well, yeah, and it's huge because, a principle, and we've talked about it a lot, is friends determine the direction and quality of your life. So be wise with your friends. The scriptures say in the Proverbs, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm.
Yep.
Friends are so important. So they're going to have their friends, and there's going to be friends you like and don't like, and you're going to look at that friend and be like, oh my gosh, or, they're a terrible influence for my son or daughter. And there's going to be a friend that's a wonderful influence for my son or daughter. So all of that mixed together.
Yep.
And then if you can have, as you're saying, that small group leader, that their frontal lobe is developed.
Yep.
They have, perhaps been beat up enough or gone through enough life, or, the successes and the failures and all that kind of stuff to be able to partner with you. And in that coaching season, it's so spot on.
Yep.
And this is why, having your kids or doing everything you can to get your kids in a small group, to get them involved in Transit Inside Out, and even to volunteer as a small group leader. This is no, minor babysitting thing. You are literally being gifted the gift of shaping their future.
Yeah.
And that is a huge responsibility. And so
yeah,
it's a cool thing.
So you think about all those 0 to 18 and then 18 plus phases as well as in there. And then so my next question is, in light of that, and this actually is from Jeremy Edelin, because he's done a really cool exercise this, past 4 or 5 months or so of meeting just with men, with fathers, that he looks up to and admires. And it's just hey, just share with me everything you've experienced. What have you learned? What are the, nuggets you'd have for me? And I love the way his mind works, because it's it's so helpful for us here at Northpoint organizationally. He wants a win for everything. He wants to know the why, the clarity, otherwise it's a waste of time if it's pointless, if it's, but also that's part of the reason he's so high character. If he knows it matters, he's man, I'll do whatever it takes because I understand the win. And so with this one, he's trying to get okay, nobody tells you the win of parenting. It seems like it's keep them alive or just exist or grow old or whatever. So he's if I'm about to step into maybe this most important role in my life next to, being a husband, then like, what's the goal of this? So if you were to try to like almost oversimplify and say like in a line or something, this is the goal or this is the win of being a parent, how would you try and tackle that?
Yeah, I think I would say one word: relationship. That's it. I think the goal of parenting, if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, I would say would be the quality of relationship.
Yeah.
The bridge of trust is wide and sturdy.
Yeah.
Like you've built that as a father, you've built that as a mother. That is the goal. Because if you have relationship, you have influence for the rest of their lives, and they need your influence. So when you're parenting 0 to 18 years or 0 to 22 or 24, depending how long they're in college, and if that's a season they choose, that is your goal. What can I do to increase the quality of the relationship, build the bridge of trust bigger with my son or daughter? I think, and that's true for somebody who's not a Christ follower or a Christ follower. But a Christ follower, I would add one additional component, and that would be your ultimate goal is to transfer the trust that you have built with your son or daughter from you to their heavenly Father through Jesus Christ, who will never forsake them or leave them. That is the greatest gift you can give your son or daughter is, when they're 25 and, they're not always going to pick up the phone or always going to text you or whatever it may be, that they can have a heavenly Father that is right there with him, is their rock, is their refuge, is their source of strength, is their source of hope and peace when it feels like there is no peace to be found, gives them direction, can speak to them, lead them, give them wisdom, give them insight in life, help them love their wife or love their husband or love their family or whatever their future is. Like God is right there with them and walking with them in the midst of the good and the hard and the medium and all of that of life. That is the goal, to go, if I can transfer the trust of my son or daughter to their heavenly Father, and that is secure, that's the win.
Wow.
If I'm not a follower of Jesus, well, build the bridge of trust deep and wide with your sons and daughters. That's it.
Wow.
I think if you can get there,
yeah,
that's a huge win.
Wow. Yeah, it's so clarifying. It is so simple to just keep that front and center. It reminds me of, and this feels like a very 20-something thing to do without kids, to apply a business book to parenting. But it reminds me of Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, where he talks about, like, so often in life our brain works like this more finite, these rules, it's time-stamped, I know if I won or lost. But he tries to challenge you to think in this like lens of infinite games that are just ongoing. There's no winner loser type thing. The goal is to stay in the game. And that's what it kind of feels like with parenting, is like to stay in the relationship, like just to continue broadening relationship. If you're a follower of Christ, keep pointing them back to Christ with time. But like that's the win, is to like keep showing up for that, like keep fighting, for that.
And if that's the win, then this is where, I've said on Sunday many times, I'm like, the people who come to Northpoint and listening and watching, they're smart. They're really smart people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, in business, if you knew the outcome of your responsibility is to deepen the relationship, you would read relational books. You would be intentional to discover, habits. This is why, in the discipline, in the 0 to 5 phase, starting those things to go, okay, that's my goal. That's the outcome. That's the win. That's what I want. What can I do to create relational kind of sowing habits today?
Yep.
This is where you take them for ice cream when they're, itty bitty. But then in those coaching years, you're sitting down and you're having really hard conversations about identity.
Yep.
You're having really hard conversations about, friends or morality or, why would God say this?
Yep.
And, if you're a follower of God and you're trying to explain some of the things that are in the Bible,
Yep.
these are critical kind of foundational things that will help the relationship. But with the win of that, I just think it gives you a lot of, okay, what am I going to do? Yeah. What is it going to require of me? What does love require of me? What does, this win require of me to do in this season? And sometimes that's to go, God, you're big enough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to freak out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we're almost overtime here, but final question, which would probably be, really helpful in also building that relationship you're just talking about. If somebody is trying to take these conversations further, again, they're right in the middle of this, they're looking for more, maybe they just had their first kid and they're in a tough season, all of that. What would be one of the most helpful resources? I know we've talked about the Faces one already. One of the most helpful resources that you would point people to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. 2 things I would say here. And the first is more of a point. And I really, if you're listening or watching, I really want you to think about this. Take a few days, think about this. In terms of parenting, I love what Joseph, I want to call him Prince, but I don't know why that name popped in my mind. But his name is Joseph Chilton Pierce. I don't know why Prince popped in my mind.
That's close.
I don't know. I'm not a big Prince fan, but Jill likes Prince. Anyways, so back to the conversation. So here's what he says. And he wrote lots of books on child development. And he says, what we are teaches a child far more than what we say. So we must be what we want our children to become. On Sundays, when I talk about my counselor, when I talk about submitting my life and trusting somebody outside of myself, which is a big decision in life, part of the reason I'm doing that is because I want to become what I want my sons to be. And I have to be what I want my sons to become, and because that is such a huge ingredient in parenting. And so this idea to go, like, who are you as a mom? Who are you as a woman? Who are you as a dad? Who are you as a man? Like, what are the things that are broken inside of you? What are the things that happened in your parent or in your childhood? What are the things that have happened in your past? What are the things that you have, stuffed under kind of the rug, if you will? Do you have any secrets? I would start there in terms of a parenting resource is you and being the healthiest version of you. And it's worth it because your kiddos are right before your eyes. So go submit your life. This is where I'm saying, like, counseling, there are good counselors and bad counselors. So I'm not saying go to counseling, it's the Holy Grail. This takes work and it takes time. But you working on you to become the best version of you is one of the greatest resources to give your kids. Because you'll know what's getting on them and not, because there's a level of self-awareness you've never had before when you say those words, when you do those things before your kids. So, I would say that first. I think a second resource, and this is just when I heard this the first time, I went, wow, this is the best thing I've ever heard. And it was by Brené Brown. And Brené Brown actually is where I got the quote from Joseph Pierce. Yeah. That's where I heard it for the first time. She unpacks that in her teaching. So she will do a much better job than I just did. But she's got the gift of imperfect parenting. And she gives context to what Joseph said. She gives context to parenting in general and kind of qualifies the guidepost. And then she gives 10 guideposts in parenting. And I love that she gives guideposts, and I love her humility in her teaching. And the reason I love she gives guidepost is because it's not formulaic. It's more of like look around and there's that post to go. I'm moving in the right direction. Right. The path is wide. Yeah. It just gives you some, like, you can breathe. You can have some confidence. I'm on the right path. And her first guidepost, I think it's her first one, is cultivating worthiness in your home. Yep. And that is huge. She says this is the number one guidepost. Like the number one thing you can cultivate worthiness. That worthiness is a birthright. It's not something that it's a qualification, or you say, if you do this, then you're worthy. Our kids need to know, man, this is foundational. Who I am worthy in the eyes of my father. I'm worthy in the eyes of my mother. And she talks about, what works with this, what works against it, what fuels worthiness, what takes away from worthiness. And it's a great guidepost, number one. And she does that with all 10. And so I would highly, highly recommend. I think you can get it like on iTunes and, I don't know if Spotify, but several different places. And I would highly recommend listening to what she has to say. That'd be my number one resource.
Wow. Yeah, I would affirm it. It's great because I think you pointed it to me in my preparation for my message part. And it's unbelievable. As somebody who doesn't have kids yet, it's unbelievable. So, that is kind of the end of the convo in terms of time remaining here. But thank you, because if nothing else, it's helpful to me where I'm at.
Well, there you go, Mowgli. You got some guideposts from Mowgli.
Exactly. Yeah, and we'll go re-listen to this when that time comes for Em and I, God willing. But So thank you for being here, even though,
Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of here for everyone, but appreciate it. Appreciate the time. And if you guys are listening to this or watching this in real time or release week, then we're kicking off a brand new series called Level Up this coming Sunday, all about how to get to that next level in your faith. If you desire something more from faith, desire something more from your relationship with God, whether you're brand new to and exploring faith or have been walking with Christ for a long time. So we're kicking that off this Sunday. If you're listening to this later than release week, then it already is out there, so you can go check it out.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So, yeah, as always, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Hey, let me, can I do one last
Yeah,
thing?
we'll not see you next.
Yeah, well,
We will see you next time.
In
but
like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I just think, man, parenting, being a parent, and if you're watching or listening and you're a parent, you totally know what I'm saying. It can be so incredibly difficult. So I'm just going to pray.
Yeah.
And then I would love when I say amen, we'll just end right there.
Perfect.
And
I like that better.
And go with that. So
Cool.
I'm going to probably pray for myself in this too. But for every parent listening, every parent watching, I just want to pray for you. And Father, I want to come before you because you as a good father, you know our hearts, you know our minds, you know our struggles, you know the things that are before us. And Father, you know our sons and daughters far better than we do. And you know what they're dealing with. You know what's going on. You know their struggles. You know their questions. You know their doubts. You know their hurt. You know their pain, and you know their joy. You know it all. And so, God, for parents who are watching or listening, I just pray that you give them incredible wisdom with the things that they've heard today. I pray that as they move to this, whatever season they are, and they move to the next seasons, that you just meet them where they're at, that you wrap your arms around them, give them peace, give them comfort. And Father, give them just insight and discernment and wisdom on what to know or what to do in the next season, what to do in this current season. And then God, please give us the courage to go do it. It is incredibly difficult to have the conversations, to move forward, to do the things we need to do as moms and dads. So I just pray for your courage and your strength. In Jesus' name, amen.